Bolt leading a moment and going away. Gay trying to go with him, and he's being dragged through to second place, but he's going to win it by 2 meters.
The country has already started looking past them, searching for the next name, the next contender, the next once-in-a-generation talent. Sometimes that search begins before the athlete has had a chance to become anyone at all. For Romell Glave, there was no avoiding it. He grew up watching Usain Bolt turn the 100 meters into something the world had never seen, and years later, Glave would become one of the fastest teenagers on the planet himself. He'd leave Jamaica for Britain as a teenager. He'd fracture his back, twice. He'd spend an entire year locked in a brace, unsure if his career was already over. And then he'd come back and win European gold. But this isn't really a story about becoming the next Usain Bolt. It's a story about what happens when the boy who idolized him has to stop chasing a legend and start building something that's actually his own. Before we get into how he did it, and how close he came to never doing it at all, if you're into stories about athletes who had to rebuild themselves from nothing, hit subscribe now. Because what happened to Romell Glave over the next few years is one of the most underrated comeback arcs in modern sprinting, and you're going to want to see exactly how it ends. Romell Glave was born on November 11, 1999, in Manchester, Jamaica. As a kid, sprinting wasn't the only thing on his mind. He played football, he played cricket, and athletics was just one part of an ordinary Jamaican childhood. Then came Beijing, 2008. Glave watched Usain Bolt explode across a track in a way that seemed to bend the rules of what a human body could do. For an 8-year-old kid watching a countryman turn sprinting into a global spectacle, that moment did more than entertain him. It convinced him. Glave has said Bolt was his biggest inspiration, the reason he decided to prioritize athletics over everything else. Here's the detail most people miss, though. When Glave was 17, the Bolt comparisons had already started, but the two of them were never really on the same path. In 2017, Glave ran 10.21 seconds for 100 meters, making him the fastest 17-year-old in the world that year at that distance. Bolt, at 17, wasn't even a 100-meter runner yet. His signature event was the 200, and by 2004 he'd already run 19.93 seconds at the Carifta Games, the first junior athlete in history to break 20 seconds. So yes, two Jamaican teenagers, two extraordinary talents, two names the athletics world couldn't stop watching. But Bolt was already writing history in his own event. Glave wasn't following him down that road. He was starting to build his own. And that road was about to take him somewhere Bolt's never did, thousands of miles away, into a completely different sprinting system, on a completely different continent. If you want to see how a Jamaican kid became a British champion, stick with this one. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because this channel is about to walk you through a comeback story most fans have never heard in full. In 2015, at 15 years old, Glave left Jamaica and moved to Britain, settling in South Norwood, South London. By January 2016, he joined Croydon Harriers, and the move didn't slow him down for a single season. That year, he won the English school's U17 200-meter title. He won both the 100 and 200 meters at the South of England Championships. Whatever talent had turned heads back in Jamaica hadn't just survived the move, it had followed him across the Atlantic. Then came 2017, the year Romell Glave stopped being a name whispered about in junior circles and became a name the wider sprinting world had to reckon with. On June 17th at Bedford, with a legal wind of +1 meter per second, Glave ran 10.21 seconds. It still stands as his U18 and U20 100-meter record in Surrey's athletics history, and World Athletics' own rankings confirm it. At 17 years old, Romell Glave was officially the fastest teenager in the world over 100 meters. He had the speed. He had the youth. He had a Jamaican sprinting pedigree and a British development system behind him. On paper, it looked like a straight line to the top. Careers are rarely straight lines. Glave's was about to fold in on itself. Over the next 6 years, he fractured his back not once, but twice, and in 2022, the damage caught up with him completely. He spent the entire year in a back brace, unable to train the way a sprinter needs to train, unable to do the one thing his whole identity had been built around. Think about what that means for an athlete whose career depends on explosive, violent movement. The teenager, once celebrated as the fastest kid in the world, was now fighting just to stand upright without pain. There's an odd echo here, back to Bolt again. Even he wasn't immune to injury as a teenager. A hamstring problem kept him out of the 2004 World Junior Championships. But Bolt's setback cost him a season. Glave's cost him years, while a new generation of sprinters climbed past him, setting the times he was supposed to be chasing. He wasn't just injured, he was disappearing from a conversation he'd once led. But he didn't quit. Working with coach Michael Afalaka, Glave rebuilt his comeback around one brutally specific target: the first 40 meters of the race. Not the whole 100, just the start. The drive phase, the acceleration, the part of the race where a damaged body has the least room to hide. They called it Project 40. There was no single miracle session that undid years of injury. It was slower than that, and far less cinematic. Rebuilding strength, rebuilding trust in a body that had already betrayed him twice. Relearning how to attack a start line instead of flinching away from it. Eventually, the work started showing up on a stopwatch. The breakthrough came in 2024, at the European Championships in Rome. Glave made the 100-meter final, and just being there was its own kind of victory. But the final itself belonged again to a familiar name. Marcel Jacobs won gold in 10.02. Italy's Chituru Ali took silver in 10.05. Glave crossed in 10.06 for bronze. It was a huge result for a man who'd spent years fighting to walk without pain, let alone sprint. But it meant something uncomfortable too. He'd finished behind Jacobs. And sometimes the most important rival in a comeback isn't the fastest man in the world. It's the one who keeps finishing just ahead of you, reminding you exactly how far you've still got to go. A year later they met again, June 2025, the Paavo Nurmi Games in Finland, against a field that included Jacobs, Andre de Grasse, Jerome Blake, and Benjamin Azamati. Glave won, 10.08 seconds. Blake took second in 10.09, Azamati third in 10.10. Jacobs finished eighth in 10.44. Afterward, Glave gave the win a name: redemption. Because this wasn't only about the result in Finland, it was about rewriting what happened in Rome, where Jacobs had stood above him on the podium a year earlier. Now the order had flipped completely. But there was still one number waiting for him, a number that has haunted sprinters for decades: 10. At the 2025 World Championships in Tokyo, Glave reached the 100-meter semifinal and ran exactly 10.00 seconds, matching the entry mark World Athletics already had on file as his personal and season best. 10 seconds exactly. For most of the planet, that's an almost unimaginable time. For a sprinter trying to break into the world's true elite, it can feel like standing one door away from a room you can't quite open. Because the gap between 10.00 and 9.99 was never really about speed. It's 1/100th of a second, and after everything Glave had already overcome, it might as well have been a mile. Then 2026 arrived and the story stopped creeping forward and started sprinting. In January in Stockholm, Glave ran a personal best of 6.51 seconds over 60 meters, still his fastest indoor mark on record. It was a small signal with a big meaning. He wasn't just returning to his old level anymore. He was exceeding it. Then came Birmingham and the UK Athletics Championships. This time there was no near miss waiting for him at the line. Glave won the 100 meters in 9.98 seconds, his first legal sub-10 performance, confirmed by British Athletics. Zarnell Hughes finished second in 10.00. Louis Hinchcliffe edged out Jeremiah Azu for third. Here's the part worth sitting with. Afterward, Glave said the time wasn't really the point. Qualification was the point. The clock was secondary. Years earlier, a 10.21 had turned him into a teenage sensation. Now a legal sub-10 was just part of the job. The biggest stage of his year was still ahead of him. August 2026, Birmingham, the European Athletics Championships, and for the first time ever, the men's 100-meter continental final was being run on British soil. Glave lined up as one of the favorites, and across the track in another lane stood the man who kept shaping his story from the outside, Marcel Jacobs. The man who'd beaten him in Rome, the man he'd beaten in Finland. Now they were sharing a European final again, except this time the stakes weren't a podium spot, they were the title. The gun went. The field tore forward. Jacobs' race fell apart almost immediately. An injury dropped him to 7th, finishing in 12.26. Glave kept driving through the line. 10.09 seconds. Jeremiah Azu took silver in 10.16. Owen Ansa claimed bronze in 10.19. Romell Glave was European champion. Not a promising teenager anymore. Not a cautionary tale about injury. Not a bronze medalist standing behind Marcel Jacobs. A champion, full stop. 2 years earlier in Rome, Jacobs had stood above him. In Birmingham, the positions had completely reversed. After the race, Glave's message to the cameras was short. "Now is my time to dominate." On its own, that's just confidence talking. But knowing everything that came before it, the fractured back, the year in a brace, the seasons spent watching younger sprinters pass him while he could barely train, it reads completely differently. It sounds like a man who waited years for his body to hand him one more chance, and finally got it. He wasn't finished. 4 days later, Glave was back on the track for the men's 4x100 relay, alongside Jeremiah Azu, Louis Hinchcliffe, and Zarnell Hughes. Great Britain ran 38.45 seconds. Gold, again. Glave left Birmingham with 2 European titles in a single championship, 1 individual, 1 relay. The career that once looked like it might quietly end in a back brace had become one of the biggest comeback stories in British sprinting. So back to where this story started. Usain Bolt was the inspiration. Glave has said so himself, more than once. But putting their careers side by side was always going to be unfair to both of them. Bolt became a once-in-history athlete. 8 Olympic golds, world records that reshaped an entire sport. Glave was never going to repeat that. Nobody was. The more honest comparison isn't the outcome, it's the beginning. Bolt was a Jamaican teenager who convinced the world something extraordinary was possible. Glave was one of the kids who watched him and believed it too. But at 17, their numbers didn't even belong to the same event. Glave's 10.21 over 100 meters against Bolt's world junior record 19.93 over 200. Glave was never the next Bolt. He didn't need to be, because the real story here isn't imitation. It's a boy who needed Bolt as proof that greatness was possible, and years later became a champion by finding an entirely different version of it. Manchester, Jamaica. A boy watching Bolt change sprinting forever. A move to London at 15. A 10.21 at 17 that made him a name. Years of injury. A full year in a brace. A slow, unglamorous rebuild around the first 40 meters of a race. A bronze in Rome. A statement win over Jacobs in Finland. A 10.00 in Tokyo that felt like standing at a locked door. And finally 9.98, then a European title, then a second gold 4 days later. His current legal personal best sits at 9.97 seconds, run in London on July 18, 2026. World Athletics does list a faster 9.76 from July 1st, but it's marked wind illegal, which means it isn't and shouldn't be treated as his official best. That distinction matters. This story was never about exaggerating the numbers. It's about what actually happened. A stopwatch can only tell you how fast someone runs. It can't tell you how long they waited. It can't tell you what it costs to watch your career vanish and then claw your way back to the start line anyway. At 17, Romell Glave was a boy trying to follow Usain Bolt's example. At 26, he isn't following anyone. He's running his own race. And maybe the most important thing about Romell Glave was never how fast he became. It's that he never stopped trying to become fast again.